Well, my message today is pretty simple. The slides will be fairly simple as well. My message is I believe human beings have a right to privacy, and that's a big part of what I do personally. I think that's a big part of what we're doing in this community. And I'm tackling this from the perspective of someone who's in finance. I'm in academic finance, and what I'm going to talk about today in particular is this new field that we're calling cryptofinance, which you guys have heard today, crypto economics. I'd say this is probably a subfield of that. I'm not going to be talking about game theory though, but hopefully you guys find it interesting. And I think that the key component for cryptofinance and for crypto economics is going to be privacy. So I think that the message, the takeaway that I'm going to give you guys today is that we need to think about building these systems from the ground up with privacy in mind, or else they're not going to be, some people will inevitably be excluded from them. Okay, so in addition to being the co-founder of Zen, actually the first slide there, I'm not really talking about my project, but it's a privacy coin, hence my topic on privacy. I'm also a PhD candidate in finance, doing research in crypto finance. And what I really liked earlier today, actually before lunch, was the talk about Bitcoin prices being different in different countries. That was actually the topic of my first research paper in the space, where from an arbitrage pricing perspective, that just doesn't make sense. Like, why wouldn't people arbitrage away these opportunities? Turns out that sometimes bad policies can have lasting consequences, and really we're looking at bad policies across countries, or policies across countries that limit these arbitrage trading opportunities. I also teach at my university Bitcoin and blockchain applications in finance. So I'm able to instill the excitement for blockchain and Bitcoin into young students. I think that's a very rewarding experience. And I have some life goals over here. I want to decentralize basically everything. Governance is a pretty big thing. I want to decentralize the internet, and I'm working actively to decentralize finance. Okay, and I've worked a variety of projects in the space, from zClassic to BitShares and BlockPay, doing merchant services. And another one that's not exactly Bitcoin related, but I urge everyone to check out, is something called the Seasteading Institute. We're actually trying to decentralize governance, but not with code. We're trying to decentralize governance on actually like startup cities. Okay, and we're working with blockchain in that platform. So that's who I am. And what I'm going to talk about is, I'll start with just some of the motivations of where we are with crypto finance. We've heard a lot of this stuff already. This isn't going to be big news for a lot of people, but I want to restate some of the things that are going on, giving you a snapshot of where the market is. Well, fundamentally, finance is being disrupted. I like to think of it as we're Uberizing finance. We're kind of bringing finance to the people, which is kind of a cool thing. And we're doing this across a wide spectrum of finance. Basically, any part of finance that people graduate college and go work in, whatever sub-industry, it's being disrupted. And it's starting at the macroeconomic level with the concept of money, what we even consider money. We're kind of prioritizing money, and we're giving people options now for what type of monetary policies they want to adopt, rather than just being forced to adopt. We've already seen today the topic of remittance, sending money across borders. That's definitely an area ripe for disruption. Settlement, asset settlement and trading. We've seen the discussion prior to lunch, different decentralized exchanges. That's a beautiful thing. I can't wait to see decentralized exchanges become more popular. Trade finance, venture funding. Actually, venture funding is kind of a funny thing, because this ICO thing that we heard some extensive talks on earlier is kind of disrupting venture capital. At least now, as an entrepreneur, you have the choice between trying to pitch take your pitch deck to some venture capitalists and convince them to give you a few $100,000 or maybe a few $1 million to test out your idea. Put together a minimum viable product, take it to market, and actually get results before they give you more money. Now you write 10 pages on a white paper like we heard, and you're given $10 million. So it's a completely different choice set now for entrepreneurs going out there. I do think that there will be some agency issues. There's a lot of information asymmetry in this market. So we'll probably see some, maybe a bubble. I'm not going to make any predictions here. That might pop. Who knows? So the new concept is private keys are turning into the new bearer bonds. So you having your private keys gives you on-demand access to your own assets. That's a really interesting thing historically. Cryptocurrencies, actually, some work that I've been doing is, and this is actually becoming more widely known now. Now people realize Bitcoin's uncorrelated to stocks, bonds, real estate, any of your other traditional asset classes. And from a portfolio theory perspective, that's beautiful. Like if you're trying to combine a portfolio of risky assets, it's kind of magical how you can have these risky assets that in combination together are far less risky than having any of them individually. Well, adding cryptocurrencies to your portfolio, makes that magic, kind of puts it on steroids, at least so far, especially when they have expected returns that have been so skewed to the right. Ton of investment capital. So here's where we're seeing just ridiculous disruption. I mean, just public blockchains themselves are now over $1 billion. I was giving a talk similar in Tahiti at the Seasteading Institute there a month ago. It was a month ago, or almost 2 months ago. And I had on this exact bullet point, I had $30 billion market, and I thought that was pretty crazy. Fast forward a month or so, and we're $100 billion plus. So things are moving fast. Venture capital, so over $1.5 billion has flowed to new ventures. I think I read a statistic that in 2016, the ICO market had about 50% of the entire venture capital market's worth of capital flowing to new ventures. So that's actually gone exponential this last year. And I'll show you the next slide that shows some of those, the bar charts are just going exponential. But ICOs have raised almost $1 billion. I mean, when I wrote the slide a few months ago, it was, I don't know, like 150, $200 billion, or $200 million, and it's already jumped up to almost $1 billion. Okay, so I'm going slow. But here's the kind of a quick graph of the ICO craze. I mean, this price should give you some sense of information content. So I don't know if it's necessarily a bubble. Although as a betting man, I might bet on it. But some of the big points I want to make here, besides what's going on in crypto finance, is that bad policies are very costly to society. Okay. In fact, I would say, and this might be controversial, but I would say that bad policies are the leading cause of poverty around the world. It's not that people are fundamentally different, and oftentimes they could be in an asset-rich environment, but they still remain poor. And one of the big driving factors there is that they have bad policies in their country. But we see the same thing now with Bitcoin is one way for people to protect themselves from bad policies in some countries versus now we don't have to worry necessarily about your wealth being subject as much to a bad policy in one country because you can diversify easily outside of your country with Bitcoin or cryptocurrencies. So it's really good for people in politically volatile economies. Here's the paper I wrote a couple of years ago. Just some of the graph here shows you Bitcoin premiums now over global prices are negatively correlated or negatively related to economic freedom. Okay, so there's a lot of volatility in policies. You might think that you're living in a stable country now, but fast forward 10 years from now, and it might not be so stable. In fact, there might be some Trump fans here. I saw Make Bitcoin Great Again hat again. I thought you were a Trump fan initially with Make America Great Again hat, but I love the Bitcoin one. But I would say in my country, in the U.S., we're actually experiencing quite a bit of potential volatility in our political framework. But historically speaking, even in the U.S., in 1933, gold was criminalized. And the concept of hoarding gold, just having gold for yourself for a monetary purpose, was outlawed. So again, you may think that you live in a stable country, but the law can change on you with the next administration. Okay, so there's plenty of other examples throughout history. There's a crisis in Venezuela right now. There's always a crisis every decade or so in Argentina, and it makes people poor. It's hard to plan for your life and for your family if your wealth is always subject to political instability. And policies vary significantly across countries. We know Bitcoin is actually illegal in some countries in the world. Here's just a quick map of political risk. This is a few years stale, but the information actually hasn't changed much. But there are a lot of parts of the world that are politically unstable. Here's another graph that just shows you that almost no matter what kind of country you live in, this is actually a scale on, like over here would be like stable democratic institutions, autocracies, and most people live kind of in the middle over here. But there's always a risk of political instability no matter what society you live in. right now in Venezuela. I read a paper that showed that Venezuelans have lost an average of 19 pounds, like actually body weight, since their crisis started. That's a humanitarian issue. So what we're doing here, I think, has potentially some interesting and very important implications for people around the world. Is that, well, first of all, I think that privacy isn't just for criminals. There are plenty of people around the world that privacy could be a fundamental part of their economic well-being, to be able to keep some of their resources out of the hands of potentially predatory regimes. But when we're looking at building systems, and there are plenty of humanitarian projects in the space. Look at Humanique. I love what they're doing, trying to bring banking to the unbanked, and there's other projects like that as well. But they're specifically saying we're going to make the entire system visible to anyone. That could be problematic because there are a lot of people that live around the world in poverty, not because they don't have access to some sort of technology, because entrepreneurs could bring it there, but there's some fundamental barrier preventing people from bringing these systems to them. So I think that we need to inoculate their economic welfare from political volatility. Systems should include extreme privacy by default. So you start your system with privacy features built in, and then you could build the other good stuff on top of that, and that would make sure that people, no matter what part of the world they live in, will have access to your system. And we can do a lot of different things with blockchains. We've had some really good talks so far about, you can secure communications, universal identification systems. I think one of the best things from an economics perspective is we're eradicating the plague of inflation. I think inflation has been a plague in human history, and we can eradicate that programmatically. That's awesome. And just providing clear and immutable economic policies. I think it's kind of silly. It kind of makes me laugh when you look at CNBC, which is like the market cable station in the U.S., and you're looking at the news, and traders are trying to figure out what's the market going to do, and they're waiting for news from Janet Yellen, who heads up the Federal Reserve Board, and just wondering where interest rates going. What interest rate is this person going to just set for all of society? Well, with blockchains, we can actually programmatically set that and choose to adopt it, not adopt it, experiment with different options. So I think we're changing things in a really good way. We're kind of democratizing finance, and like I said before, bringing money to the people. But this really does require, I think, an emphasis on privacy, and I think that that's a human right. Thank you.